This video is the next in a series after models of psychotherapy. I'll assume you have a clear idea of the nature of therapy models, their strengths and limitations. This video focuses on the practice of therapy, our attitudes, actions, and techniques, how we are, what we do, and why we do it. Therapy provides space and time for a person to resolve whatever is impeding or hindering their healing and development. From this perspective, we focus on the natural flow of experience and what causes it to get blocked and disturbed. Our prime job is to help clients get unstuck. Healing and recovery is normal and automatic if nothing gets in its way. Think about all the scrapes, cuts, and bruises you've had that have healed without you doing anything. It's normal to heal. It's normal to have a bad mood that you get over in a day or so. It's normal to feel anxious before a performance. It's unnatural to be stuck in a depressed state for more than 2 weeks. It's unnatural to always panic when you go outside. Each of us is designed to heal and grow in our own way and according to our own nature. When that growth gets blocked, we have a problem. Therapy sessions seldom proceed exactly as expected. Even when we apply a tried and true technique, it doesn't always work, and the client often doesn't respond as we hope. To be effective, we have to adapt our practice to the needs and nature of the client and to whatever is happening in the session. With experience, we learn to be flexible and creative in the moment, rather than have a fixed idea of what we should do or what needs to happen. A good therapy session is like a dance in which each person takes turn leading and following. A client describes their experience, we listen and respond in a particular way. In that moment, we make a decision on what to pay attention to and how to frame our response. The client listens and goes through a similar process. Therapy is a web of decisions, both conscious and unconscious, that shape the flow of the session and influence both what client and therapists experience. The difference between the participants is that the therapist's intention is to communicate in a way that helps the client move forward. The client, on the other hand, often communicates their stuckness. Our task is to positively influence how the client thinks, feels, and acts, not just in the session, but in their life outside. We help them gain a wider perspective, learn something new, try something different, move through their stuckness towards change and growth. In my practice, I draw on a range of therapy models and techniques and try to use what best fits the client and their state. I think of technique as a pattern or form within which there is infinite varieties and adaptations. Just as we seldom say the exact sentence more than once or eat the same meal time after time, so our approach needs to be creative and tailor-made to the situation. In that way, therapy is always fresh, and we are always learning and improving. This video is divided into 2 parts: how to be a therapist and how to do therapy. The first part looks at the process of therapy and the attitudes, orientation, and relationship we need to maintain. The second part explores the nuts and bolts of beginning a session, exploring stuckness, and both basic and enhanced techniques. First, we're going to look at how to be a therapist. Being a therapist includes our attitudes, orientation, and relationship with the client. These have a powerful influence on what we are able to do and achieve in a session. They are aspects of what is called the process rather than the content of psychotherapy. So I will first need to explain what I mean by content and process. Content is the what of therapy. It's the topics, themes, ideas, and actions that make up the substance of every session. A client comes in and tells us they feel paralyzed with anxiety. The content of that session might be exploring when and where they feel anxious and what they might do about it. Anxiety and the discussion about anxiety are the content of the session. In contrast, process is the how and why of therapy. It asks the questions, how does this particular person experience their anxiety? Why are they telling me this in this way? How does their anxiety impact our relationship? How do I feel when they are anxious? Process is the way events and experiences constantly unfold and change over time. It includes both the therapist's and the client's experiences. As such, it is more like a video rather than a series of snapshots, and it is much harder to track and notice. Imagine the client's experience as a flowing river. Thoughts, feelings, and sensations come and go. What they talk about is on the surface of the river, the stuff floating by that captures their attention, thoughts, feelings, and memories they are most aware of. As an observer, you see more than they do. You hear what the person talks about, but you also notice lots of other stuff. The way the water flows, the trees on the bank, and even glimpses of what is beneath the surface, fish, rocks, plants, etc. These are unnoticed or even avoided aspects of the client's experience. It may be that a particular rock is what caused the water to be rough and turbulent. It may be damming the whole river. So when we notice something, we have to decide how we will bring the client's attention to that and how we will help the river flow more fluidly. This is the essence of a therapeutic intervention. Every time we ask a question, make a comment, or suggest an activity, the client's attention is drawn towards that something in a different way. That something now enters their awareness, and they can choose to do something about it or not. In our metaphor, they notice the fish that is dying, the rock that blocks the flow. Now they may even sense other things they had not noticed before, and their awareness and field of action expands. Therapy is about influencing a person's experience. To do that, we first focus on essential attitudes, orientations, and relationship of the client. To be present, to cultivate a relationship, and to intend to be helpful are the most essential aspects of therapy. If we're not present, not fully engaged with the client, they will know at some level and naturally hold back and be more superficial in what they tell us. If the relationship is not good enough for them to relax and trust us, they won't tell us the truth or what is most important to them. We are therapists because we want to understand and help others. Being helpful means developing skills and abilities that influence others for their own good. That is what technique, method, and interventions are all about. So first, let's look at the quality of our presence. In psychotherapy, you could say we sell our time and our expertise, but we also sell our presence. Basically, to be present is to engage energetically, pay close attention to the client and their communications, and maintain a sense of empathy and emotional connectedness with them. Our presence and attentiveness, our acceptance and openness to what the client brings are the most powerful aspects of therapy. Many clients have never been listened to without interruption. They have not had their experience accepted and validated. They've had few compassionate people in their lives. They are deprived of attention and may even have developed attention-seeking behaviors because of that. We cannot be present when we're distracted, distressed, or disorganized. We have to put aside extraneous thoughts and concerns and become as fully in the moment as possible. That means not thinking about things in the past or future, not wondering what to cook for dinner, not worried about the last client we saw. If we're anxious or unsettled, we will not be able to pay close attention to our client and track what he or she is saying and expressing. Yes, we can pretend, but clients know at some level if we're not all there. Practices such as meditation, mindfulness, and prayer that quiet the mind are really helpful, and I would say even essential to help us become present. A famous psychologist said, "Our world and our experience is what we choose to pay attention to." At this moment, you're watching this video, so that fills the focus of your attention, and all sorts of other things, the room, the background noises, your bodily sensations, fade into the distance. Think of attention as a spotlight that illuminates certain things and leaves all other things in the gloom. The spotlight constantly shifts and moves around, so we have the illusion that we are aware of many things, but actually our attention is very limited and easily influenced by any sudden noise or an extraneous thought or our belly rumbling with hunger. Of course, we listen to what the client says, but we also need to notice their nonverbal communication. This informs us about what the client may not be saying or even conscious of. If a client wanders around in their narrative, talks about superficial things, keeps distracting and diverting, we have to decide if this is a reflection of their cognitive style, maybe a product of some sort of neurodiversity, such as autistic spectrum, or if they are consciously or unconsciously avoiding some painful topic. In general, when a person is in a very vulnerable emotional state, it is best to use our attention gently and empathically and give lots of supportive feedback. As I said previously, whenever we ask a question, we direct the person's attention to some particular aspect of their experience. If you ask the question, "How are you feeling?" they pay attention to their feelings. If you ask, "When was the first time you felt that?" they'll search their memory for that feeling in the past. So, for example, if I say, "Notice the tension in your shoulders," most probably your attention quickly shifted to the sensations in your shoulders to check for tension. My words moved your awareness towards something different. Therapy directs or alters the focus of the client's attention and generates new awareness. We highlight aspects of the client's experience that they do not usually know or notice. Be empathic. We need to see the world through our client's eyes. We need to feel with them and not for them. We have to accept some difficult feelings. And we have to know that we are important to our client. The capacity for empathy is built into most human beings, with some notable exceptions. We have to train and hone our ability to feel with our clients, and yet not get overwhelmed or hooked into their feelings. It's easy to have empathy for sadness and loss, but it's harder to stay with a client who is overly anxious, controlling, or hostile. We have to extend our capacity for compassion into areas of emotion that are uncomfortable and even threatening for us. One of the things we may not consider is that clients have feelings for us and about us. They may love us, hate us, be fearful we'll reject them. Most of those feelings are transference, in which they re-experience unresolved relationships from the past, particularly with parents. We have to accept those feelings, but not get tangled in them. Naturally, we become important to our clients. Some depend on us for a sense of stability over a period of time. We need to have compassion for their vulnerability while doing everything we can to foster greater independence and autonomy. Real and unreal relationships. All relationships have real and unreal aspects, no matter how well or long we've known a person. It is just as true in a marriage as it is in therapy. The unreal aspects never go away completely. It's one of the reasons couples get into all sorts of tangles and disagreements. But with time, as we get to know someone, the real aspects grow and the unreal aspects of the relationship shrink. We understand the other person better and the connection goes deeper and more genuine. In therapy, because of the one-sided nature of the relationship, the unreal aspects are always there and often interfere with the progress of therapy. In general, the more artificial and distant the relationship is for the therapist, the more there is room for the client to have fantasies and projections. Psychoanalysis purposefully uses this to strengthen the transference by keeping the analyst distant, sitting behind the patient on the couch. In ordinary therapy, because we are more engaged and face-to-face, the transference is milder and often does not intrude too much on the work. However, clients always project unresolved issues onto the therapist. But as the relationship becomes more real and solid, these issues get resolved. The more traumatized and disturbed the individual, the stronger the unreal aspects of the therapeutic relationship. We experience this particularly through unrealistic expectations the client has of therapy or the therapist. They might believe we will cure them or be available to them day and night. We feel it when we get hopeless and dispirited working with a depressed client, or when we are working harder to get progress than the client is. As the client moves through their stuckness, the relationship becomes easier with greater collaboration and movement. We find clients more willing to explore their inner experiences or try different suggestions. This makes it much easier to do therapy. In this section, we'll look in more detail at the actual techniques and methods we use in a session. Each session is unique, and we begin by intentionally orienting ourselves towards the client and the forthcoming session. I believe a session begins at least 5 minutes before you see the client. This is when you need to prepare, both in terms of what you might do, but also how you need to be. Often I get an intuitive sense of how the client will be in the session before I even see them. I tend to get quiet and settle for a couple of minutes before the person arrives, so I have a clear sense of my own state. This is helpful in tracking any transference energy I might pick up during the session, as I can compare my state before and after the time together and get a sense of what's going on in the relationship. I see most clients via Zoom. Unless something goes wrong technically, I always start exactly on time. It's essential that we are reliable and show up when expected. For some clients, this is an extremely important message, that we dedicate the whole time to them and their concerns. As soon as you see the client, try to get a sense of their inner state by checking their nonverbal communication. Tiredness around the eyes, tension in the body, nervous habits. These nonverbal cues provide a wealth of information, and the more you pay attention to them, the more you know and understand your client's state. Likewise, how they respond to your greeting provides information about how comfortable or not they are in the relationship. I have a client who typically says, "Hi," in a kind of dispirited manner. She has lots of ambivalence about therapy, and it's reflected in her initial greetings. After the client and therapist settle, and as the client begins speaking, the therapist begins to pay attention to what is getting in the way of the client's growth, healing, and inner feeling. We explore psychological stuckness. Stuckness are those aspects of a person's experience that block or hinder that person's healing and growth. We can recognize stuckness because a client can't or won't do something that is normal for others. So you ask a person with a dog phobia to imagine reaching out with their hand to a dog. Immediately they show signs of anxiety and try to avoid the suggestion. Similarly, a depressed person has a hard time enjoying themselves. A person with an emotionally deprived childhood has problems trusting. A rape victim won't feel comfortable going out of the house. All are limited or blocked in the way they think, feel, and act. When I recognize a limitation, block, or stuckness in a client, I ask myself the questions: why this? Why now? Why still? And what helps? These guide me to think about certain factors that influence stuckness: vulnerability, triggers, maintaining forces, and healing forces. Each of these becomes a focus or theme for the session as I help the client explore the issues in depth. As a general rule, exploring and resolving or utilizing these factors make up the majority of what we do in therapy. I won't go into all of these factors in detail, but you can see that each of them has many facets. Overall vulnerability to psychological problems may be inbuilt in a person's constitution or temperament, but often results from early trauma and deprivation or illness. A person gets triggered because of overwhelming life events or situations that remind them of a traumatic experience in the past. Operant conditioning is when two experiences get closely connected such that similar events trigger automatic reactions, as in couples quarreling. Maintaining forces are most often fear and anxiety, but many other forces can help maintain stuckness, such as unconscious complexes. These are aspects of our psyche that have power to influence our conscious experience. Finally, we should always look for those aspects of the person or their environment that support and encourage change and healing. All progress in therapy results from overcoming limitations and expanding our awareness of what is possible. To this end, we have some basic therapeutic techniques onto which we can graft a whole range of enhanced methods and interventions. Hopefully, all of us therapists understand and practice basic good counseling technique. Listening is the most fundamental of all therapeutic methods, but it's not at all simple. We should ask ourselves, what are we listening to? And what are we listening for? Clients tell their stories. These are descriptions and narratives of their conscious experience. We need to understand and appreciate not only what they tell us, but what it means to them. If a person says they're depressed, do we know what depression means to that person? We may need to explore and clarify that meaning. How they tell us the story is as important as the story itself. That's the music that goes with their lyrics. Then there's the question, what are they not saying, not telling? What's been left out for some reason? Can we also listen for that? Questioning and clarifying helps us understand how each person creates and experiences their world. One of my most useful clarifications is simply, say more about that. In practice, we need to balance clarifying with responding. We ask a question, receive a reply, and then respond to what they say with a simple reflection, an interpretation, or reframe of what that might mean, all according to what we believe can be most helpful in that moment. In my practice, I integrate coaching and teaching with therapy. That means making practical suggestions, offering perspectives, and prescribing homework as needed. I draw on my own and my clients' experiences of what works best and try to tailor the suggestions to the person's situation. Some therapists believe this is intruding on the client's own way of learning, as it imposes a different viewpoint. However, when we're both respectful and informative, the client feels supported and can get to grips with things more easily. On this slide, I outline some of the techniques I use with clients. They reflect different therapeutic models I've learned and integrated over the years. I offer them as examples of the almost infinite variety of methods we can learn and use. You'll come to your own ways of working and use different techniques that reflect your preferences. I think of these as advanced techniques that require time and practice. They should not be used randomly, but only in response to the client's needs and the therapy situation. My intention with every client is not only to address their psychological issues, but also help enrich their lives. If appropriate and asked, I will offer advice on practical matters, such as finance or even gardening and construction. In my work, I have a range of mini models that simply encapsulate an idea or issue. A couple of my common ones are compassion with boundaries as a model of helping others, or looking at our fundamental resources of time, energy, money, and attention. These models spontaneously come to mind as needed and offer the client a way to grasp a useful way of thinking. If I'm working with a client's dilemma, I might suggest using a pro-con scale with numbers and scaling to see what aspects are most important. So I'll just ask them to tell me what are the pros, what are the cons, to write those in a list, give each of them a scale from 0 to 10, and then add up the numbers. They'll see which one comes out as strongest. If dealing with anxiety and depression, I always check a person's exercise and sleep schedule and may suggest coherence breathing technique to help settle. You can find out about coherence breathing on the internet. Much of talk therapy is to help link parts of a person's life and experience into a whole. Interpretation is used to connect current difficult experiences with childhood trauma or deprivation. If some behavior happens regularly, I will point out the recurring and stuck pattern. Many of my comments are intuitive reflections as I get an insight into some aspect of their experience that was previously hidden. Possibly my favorite approach is working symbolically with dreams, stories, and humor. I always ask for dreams and use them as guides to what is happening at a deeper level. I often use stories from my own or clients' experience to create a richer understanding of some subject. Similarly, I use vibrant metaphors to help a person hold on to an idea. So I might talk about depression as a heavy, wet overcoat that drags you down. Humor is essential. I can get most people to laugh, and I like to have clients leave the session with a smile. Energetic techniques intentionally use your personal presence, nonverbal communication, and intensity of attention to create an atmosphere in which the client responds without conscious thought. So, for instance, if you're silent for a period and intensely focus on the client, they feel a pressure to speak, and what they say will often be unexpected. In contrast, if you relax and allow your attention to become soft and diffuse, the client will tend to settle and may even enter a state of reverie and inward focus. When using hypnosis, it's almost essential that the therapist enters a certain dreamy, trance-like state. That creates an inviting atmosphere for the client, and they'll tend to drift easily into hypnosis. This also allows images and words to rise up spontaneously from the therapist's unconscious. Altered state work is complex and needs a lot of training. At first, it can feel quite alien to the therapist, as there is a certain loss of control over the process. But with practice, techniques such as EMDR begin to come naturally and adapted to the needs of the client, rather than a rote-learned technique. Finally, I learned about the use of symbols, trance states, and nonverbal communication from a talented therapist called David Grove. His approach, called clean language, uses only the words spoken by the client to lead them into an altered state in which they engage with symbolic representations of their core problems. It's an unusual approach that works best with imaginative clients, but can have remarkable results. Here are some questions to think about. In our work as therapists, we need to continually examine how we work and ask ourselves, what are the next steps in our development? So you can ask yourself, how present am I during a session? What tends to distract me or bother me? What gets in the way of me being focused? Can I be empathic without getting overwhelmed? Can I feel with the client? Do I notice the quality of the relationship? Is the person more distant? Are they closer? Do they seem to trust me or not trust me? So here are more questions. Do I take time to prepare for each session? I've given an outline of how you might do that. Do I recognize when a client is stuck and what it is that might be causing that stuckness? What are my preferred techniques? Are those techniques I've learned, or are those techniques that I feel drawn to, that feel natural to me? And what enhanced techniques do I want to learn so that I can develop fully and completely as a therapist? I'm often asked if I get bored or burdened by my clients. After all these years, I'm still surprised by how much I enjoy and get satisfaction from therapy. Each session is a whole new experience. Our work is a constant challenge, and we are called to keep growing in ways we never imagined. There's no limit to psychotherapy and all the different ways we can practice it successfully. Thank you.